Welcome to Forbidden Archives, the show all about the Illuminati conspiracy, where myths and history kind of collide.
Yeah.
And those whispers turn into, well, sometimes, revelations.
Right.
We're your hosts, and today we're diving deep.
Yeah, deep.
Into one of the most feared and misunderstood.
Oh, yeah, definitely misunderstood.
Secret societies in history.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the Illuminati.
Naughty, yeah.
And how fear and power and even philosophy created a myth that, well...
That's still with us.
It's still with us today.
Yeah, big time.
We're calling this deep dive. Thrones burned by design. Illuminati, Jacobins, and the Engineered Revolution.
Catchy.
So to get into all this, we're looking at a pretty fascinating, but also pretty controversial book.
Oh, for sure.
Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism by Abbé Augustin Barruel.
Now, that's a mouthful, right?
It is.
But it's not just some fringe pamphlet.
Right.
This was written by Barruel, a French Jesuit priest.
Okay.
And he was writing in exile in England in the late 1790s.
Okay, exile.
Yeah, so he had to flee France.
Yeah.
And his memoirs, published in French, between 1797 and 1798, and then they were published in English in 1799,
Okay.
made a huge splash.
Really?
Yeah, people were talking about this all over Europe.
So he was really making some waves then.
Big waves. And what's really fascinating is just how big his argument was. He believed that the French Revolution, it wasn't, some spontaneous uprising.
Right.
It was the direct result of a long-term, deliberate conspiracy.
Okay, a conspiracy to overthrow.
Oh, yeah, to overthrow everything.
Everything, the throne, the altar.
The whole social order.
The whole system.
The whole 9 yards.
Wow, that sounds...
Dramatic.
Yeah, pretty dramatic.
Oh, absolutely. And Barruel pointed the finger at a coalition.
Okay, who are we talking about here?
Well, he said it was the Enlightenment philosophers.
Those guys again.
Yep, them again. Then what were the Freemasons, the shadowy order of the Illuminati? He argued that these groups, they worked together for decades.
Decades.
Yeah, they created this system and ideology that was then picked up and ruthlessly implemented by the Jacobins during the Revolution.
So the Jacobins, they were kind of the muscle.
Yeah, you could say that. They were the ones who took those ideas and really put them into action in a very violent way.
So his memoirs really became this kind of like foundational text.
Yeah, a foundational text for understanding the French Revolution from a very specific, very right-wing perspective.
Right, so we have to remember the context.
Oh, absolutely. This was written in a very specific time and place.
Right.
And it definitely reflected those biases.
Okay, so Barruel saw the late 18th century as this kind of like this continuous plot.
Oh, yeah, he saw it as a constant cutting effort to undermine everything.
And what were the main parts of this conspiracy, according to him?
Well, he broke it down into 3 core conspiracies.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, so first we have the conspiracy of impiety, and that was aimed at destroying God and Christianity.
Right, okay.
Then you have the conspiracy of rebellion targeting kings and monarchies.
Of course, yeah.
And finally, the conspiracy of anarchy designed to dismantle society in general.
Okay, so total chaos, right?
Pretty much. He saw all of these threads as, interconnected, this relentless effort to just completely topple the established order.
It's interesting how systematic he was about it.
Oh, yeah. He wasn't just throwing out random accusations.
Right.
He really tried to create this, coherent narrative,
Like a grand unified theory of conspiracy.
Exactly. So let's start with that conspiracy of impiety, Volume 1, right?
Yeah, Volume 1. And Barruel claimed Voltaire kicked this off way back in 1728. That's a long game.
Oh, yeah. He was playing the long game for sure.
So what, Voltaire just woke up one day and said, I'm going to destroy Christianity?
Well, not quite like that.
Right.
Barruel argued that Voltaire dedicated his entire life to eradicating Christianity.
Wow. A lifelong project.
Exactly. So Barruel, he went back to the key texts of the Enlightenment.
Okay, so he did his research.
Oh, yeah. He knew his stuff, and he tried to show a direct line between the philosophical ideas of the time and the very real and very aggressive anti-Christian actions of the revolution. It's fascinating how Barruel interprets these calls for reason and liberty as inherently destructive.
Right.
But today, historians, they offer a much wider range of perspectives on the Enlightenment's legacy, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like some emphasize its role in progress and human rights while acknowledging its limitations.
That's a good point. So it's not as black and white as Barruel might have thought.
Right. It's much more complicated than that.
Okay, so he accused these philosophies of creating this pretend philosophy. What do you mean by that?
Well, Barruel believed they weren't genuinely seeking truth. He thought they were using philosophy as a weapon.
Okay, a weapon in their battle against
Christianity, yeah. He saw their emphasis on liberty and equality not as sincere ideals, but as masks for pride and revolt.
So he saw them as being manipulative.
Yeah, he felt they were intentionally leading people astray.
Interesting. And even called them
Oh, he had some choice words for them.
Did he really?
He did. He called them writers of this species, so far from enlightening the people, only contribute to lead them into the path of error. He used this term philosophism a lot. For him, this wasn't just philosophy, you know? It was a very specific movement that was deliberately undermining everything.
So philosophism, that was his big buzzword?
It was. It was his way of saying, these guys are dangerous. They're not real philosophers. They're just using philosophy to destroy everything we hold dear.
And he named names, right?
Oh, yeah. He called out Voltaire, D'Alembert, Diderot, even Frederick the Great of Prussia.
Wow, so he saw them as actively planning the revolution, like decades in advance.
That's right. He portrayed them as the masterminds behind this long-term project to undermine Christianity.
Through what he called?
A subterranean warfare of illusion, error, and darkness.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but it really captures his sense of, like, this hidden, insidious force working against the good of society.
So for him, the Enlightenment was basically this Trojan horse.
Yeah, is this seemingly harmless thing that was actually hiding something very dangerous inside.
Interesting. But, the source mentions that Barruel actually had a pretty deep knowledge of these Enlightenment figures' writings.
Oh, yeah, he did. Unlike a lot of critics who just kind of dismissed the Enlightenment outright,
Right.
Barruel seemed to have actually read the philosophers,
Huh.
like really read them. His memoirs are filled with direct quotes showing a real familiarity with their work.
So he knew what he was talking about, at least in terms of the source material.
Oh, absolutely. And that probably made his arguments more persuasive to some people at the time.
Because he could say, look, I'm not just making this up. These are their own words.
Exactly. So moving on to Volume 2, the anti-monarchical conspiracy.
Okay, let's get into that. And this time, Rousseau and Montesquieu are in the hot seat.
Right. This time it's their turn.
And they're accused of, what, wanting to destroy monarchies.
Yep. Under the guise of, liberty and freedom and all that.
So Barruel wasn't a big fan of democracy then.
Not so much. He was deeply critical of Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws and Rousseau's Social Contract.
Two pretty important books.
Very important books. And he argued that they inspired this, dangerous, disquieted spirit among the people.
Okay, a disquieted spirit, what does that even mean?
Well, he meant that people started to question everything, the very foundations of sovereignty, the extent of a ruler's authority.
So, why should a king have all this power?
Exactly. And then they started imagining these rights of the free man that undermine traditional power structures.
That's like the seeds of revolution.
Right. So Barruel's arguing for a direct line of causation here.
Okay, like A leads to B leads to C.
Exactly. It's what historians sometimes call the continuity thesis, the idea that the Enlightenment inevitably led to the radicalism of the revolution.
Is that a widely accepted theory?
It's definitely a point of significant debate among historians.
Right, because it's hard to say for sure, right? Did the Enlightenment cause the revolution, or was it just one factor among many?
It's very complex, but Barruel, he was convinced that there was a direct link.
Okay, and he even agreed with the revolutionaries, putting Voltaire and Rousseau in the pantheon. That's kind of ironic.
Right, it is a bit ironic.
But he saw that as proof of their anti-monarchical influence.
He did. He saw it as confirmation that these guys, these philosophers, they were the intellectual fathers of the revolution and its anti-monarchical sentiment.
So they were the brains behind it all.
That's what Barruel believed, and that their writings had a lasting impact, fueling the Jacobins' desire to dismantle monarchies across Europe.
Wow, so he really saw them as a threat?
Oh, absolutely. And for Barruel, rejecting monarchy wasn't just about changing a system of government. It was much deeper than that.
Okay, so what was it about then?
He saw it as a rejection of all order.
Okay, like complete anarchy.
Yeah, pretty much. He equated liberty and equality with total anarchy and the collapse of civil society.
So for him, it was a slippery slope. Once you start questioning the king, you're on your way to complete chaos.
Exactly. He believed that any form of government would inevitably crumble if you started messing with those fundamental ideas of authority.
Interesting. Okay, so let's move on to Volume 3, the Anti-Social Conspiracy. And this is where the Freemasons and the Illuminati really come into play.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting.
And he believed they were basically one giant revolutionary sect, over 300,000 members. That's a lot of secret handshakes.
Yeah, that's a lot of people meeting in dark rooms.
So he posited that these secret societies were united in their revolutionary zeal.
Absolutely. He claimed that Freemasonry's higher mysteries were always secretly atheist and Republican.
And he had evidence to support that.
Well, he claimed he did, but it's interesting because Freemasonry was, and still is, a very diverse organization.
Right, there are all sorts of people involved.
Exactly. So it's hard to imagine how they could all be united in this one grand conspiracy.
And what about the alleged open announcement of Masonic secrets after the French monarchy fell?
Oh, yeah, that was a big piece of evidence for him.
But it seems kind of convenient, doesn't it?
It does. He claimed that after August 12, 1792, the Freemasons in France just openly declared their secret aims and slogans.
Like what?
Things like liberty, equality, and fraternity.
So he took that as proof of their long-held revolutionary goals?
He did. He even said he personally heard these pronouncements.
Okay, but only in France.
Right. He also noted that in other countries, the Masons remained more secretive.
Okay, so it was kind of inconsistent then.
It was, but he explained that by saying that the decentralized structure of Freemasonry allowed the conspiracy to remain hidden and resilient.
So they were organized but also disorganized.
Yeah, it was a way of having their cake and eating it, too.
Okay, and then there's the Illuminati, led by Adam Weishaupt.
Oh, yes, the Illuminati.
Barruel saw them as the real radicalizing force, right?
He did. He believed they were even more extreme than the Freemasons,
In their opposition to...
both throne and altar.
Right, so against both the church and the monarchy?
Exactly. He argued that they infiltrated the Masonic networks to spread their radical ideas and recruit new members.
So they were kind of like a secret society within a secret society.
Right. They were operating in the shadows, even within the Freemasons.
And even though Weishaupt and the Illuminati were exposed?
Yeah, even though their cover was blown, Barruel claimed they were able to continue operating.
Because of their structure.
Right. He said that their organization allowed them to just keep going under the radar.
Wow, so for Barruel, the Illuminati were like this hydra.
Yeah, you cut off one head and two more grow back.
So for Barruel, the Jacobin clubs in Volume 4, they were the end result of this whole conspiracy.
Exactly. They were the culmination of everything he'd been talking about.
The adepts of impiety, the adepts of rebellion, and the adepts of anarchy, all rolled into one.
All in one club. He basically thought the Jacobins were just doing what the philosophies, Masons, and Illuminati had always wanted to do, but couldn't.
Right, so they were the ones who finally made it happen.
They were the ones who brought those ideas to fruition in a very bloody way.
It's interesting how Barruel positions the Enlightenment as the first target of this grand assault.
Yeah, he saw it as the opening salvo in this war against everything he valued.
And he completely rejected the idea of the revolution being a spontaneous uprising.
Oh, absolutely. He thought it was all planned, all orchestrated by this small group of conspirators.
Now, the French people, they were just pawns in this game.
That's right. He portrayed them as innocent victims manipulated by a powerful minority.
And he specifically named figures like Necker, Turgot, Mirabeau, and Sieyès.
He did. He linked them directly to the philosophies and their supposed revolutionary training.
So he saw a direct line from the Enlightenment to the Revolution.
Absolutely. He believed that the ideas of the philosophies directly inspired the actions of the revolutionaries.
Okay, and what about the Encyclopedia, that massive project that Diderot spearheaded?
Ah, the Encyclopedia. Barruel saw that as a key tool in spreading these dangerous ideas.
So like a Masonic propaganda project.
Yeah, you could say that. He believed it was a deliberate effort to spread impious and anti-monarchical ideas throughout society.
But it was just a collection of knowledge, right?
Well, that's how it was presented, but Barruel saw something much more sinister at work.
Okay, and what is that?
He believed that the Encyclopedia was carefully curated to undermine Christianity and monarchy.
So it was like a Trojan horse.
Exactly. It looked harmless on the outside, but it was filled with dangerous ideas that could corrupt the minds of the people.
And he called it a vast emporium of all the sophisms, errors, or calumnies which had ever been invented against religion.
He did. He believed that it was a deliberate attack on the church, disguised as an educational project.
Wow, that's quite an accusation. And he used this term philosophism a lot. What exactly did he mean by that? It sounds like more than just being a philosopher.
Right. It wasn't just a neutral term for him. He used philosophism as a way to discredit the ideas of the Enlightenment.
Okay, so it was like a loaded term.
Exactly. It was meant to evoke this sense of danger, of something insidious and subversive.
So it was like the way of saying, these guys aren't just philosophers, they're enemies of everything we hold dear.
Exactly. He defined it as rejecting any religious authority not based on reason, denying the possibility of mysteries beyond human understanding, and essentially trying to destroy Christianity in the name of reason, equality, and liberty.
And this term actually stuck around.
It did. Philosophism became a common insult in conservative circles, used to attack anyone who supported the ideas of the Enlightenment.
Interesting how a word can take on such a negative connotation, right?
It is. It shows how language can be used to shape people's perceptions and demonize certain ideas.
Okay, so Barruel named quite a few key players in this alleged conspiracy. We've already talked about Voltaire, D'Alembert, Frederick II, Diderot. He even gave them code names like something out of a spy novel.
He did. It adds this whole layer of intrigue to his narrative, right? Like he's uncovering this secret network of spies.
Right, like they were all James Bond villains or something.
Exactly. And he assigned roles to each of them, based on their supposed personalities and abilities.
Okay, so who was who in Barruel's spy thriller?
Well, he cast Voltaire as the chief, the mastermind behind it all.
Okay, makes sense.
Then you have D'Alembert, who was the most subtle agent, working behind the scenes to manipulate things.
Okay, the puppet master.
Exactly. Frederick II, he was the protector and advisor, providing support and guidance to the conspirators.
Okay, the money man.
You could say that. And then you have Diderot, the forlorn hope.
The what?
It's an old military term. It basically means a desperate last-ditch effort.
So Diderot was like the cannon fodder.
Well, not exactly. I think Barruel saw him as someone who was willing to do whatever it took to achieve the goals of the conspiracy.
Okay, the true believer.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the secret names Raton for Voltaire, Protagoras for D'Alembert, Luc for Frederick, and Plato for Diderot, they really add to this whole cloak and dagger atmosphere.
It's like he's writing a Dan Brown novel, centuries before Dan Brown was even born.
It really is. He's creating this whole world of secrets and hidden agendas, and it's incredibly compelling, even if it's not true.
Right, because we humans, we love a good conspiracy.
We do. It's like a puzzle, We want to figure out who's really pulling the strings.
And he even saw this conspiracy extending into the French court itself, a Voltairean ministry, secretly working to undermine the establishment from within.
Yeah, he believed that the conspiracy had infiltrated the highest levels of government.
Wow, so no one was safe.
Not in Barruel's eyes. He named figures like the Marquis d'Argenson, the Duc de Choiseul, Archbishop de Briennes, and Malesherbes.
All powerful men.
Very powerful men. And he believed that they were all part of this plot to dismantle the old order.
So he was really painting a picture of a society that was completely corrupted from the inside out.
Exactly. He saw enemies everywhere, even in the places where you would least expect them.
And beyond these core figures, he identified a whole bunch of other adepts, right? Like Condorcet, D'Holbach, Buffon.
Oh, yeah. He named a lot of people. It's like he was trying to create this comprehensive list of everyone who was involved in the conspiracy.
So he was really trying to expose the whole network.
He was. And Condorcet was a particularly interesting figure for him because he was both a Freemason and a prominent figure in the revolution.
So he was like the living embodiment of everything Barruel feared.
Exactly. And it sounds like Barruel had some specific techniques he used to build his case.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, he downplayed his own Catholicism.
Okay, why would he do that?
Because he wanted to appear neutral, like he was just presenting the facts.
So he was trying to come across as objective.
Exactly. He wanted people to believe that he wasn't just some biased priest with an axe to grind.
That makes sense. And he also used a lot of quotes, right?
Oh yeah, his books are filled with quotes from the writings of the philosophers and other figures he accused of being involved in the conspiracy.
And he would often take those quotes out of context.
He would. It was a way of making it seem like they were saying things that they didn't really mean.
So it was a bit manipulative.
It was, but it was also a very effective way of persuading people who weren't familiar with the original sources.
Right, because if you just read the quote, it might seem pretty damning.
Exactly. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're reading Barruel's work.
Okay, good advice. And how was his work initially received?
It was incredibly influential, but also very controversial.
Okay, so people were talking about it.
Oh yeah, it was a big deal, and it sparked a lot of debate, particularly among Freemasons who were understandably upset about being accused of being part of this grand conspiracy.
Right, they were probably like, hey, we're just a social club.
Pretty much. But Barruel's work also had its admirers, including some very influential figures.
Like who?
Well, Edmund Burke, for example, he was a big fan.
Really? He was a pretty important guy.
Oh yeah, he was a leading intellectual and political figure at the time.
And he bought into Barruel's theory.
He did. He even claimed to have personal knowledge of some of the people that Barruel named as conspirators.
Wow, so he was like, I knew these guys, and Barruel's is right about them.
Pretty much. So that gave Barruel's work a lot of credibility.
And it wasn't just Burke, right? There were other people who wrote similar books.
Yeah, there were. Like John Robertson, for example, he wrote a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy.
So Barruel's ideas weren't just some isolated fringe theory.
No, they were part of a larger trend of conspiracy thinking that was emerging at the time.
Okay, so there was a real fear of secret societies and hidden agendas.
Absolutely. And the French Revolution really played into that fear because it was such a dramatic and unexpected event.
Right, it made people wonder, how could this happen?
Exactly. And for some people, the easiest answer was it must have been a conspiracy.
But not everyone agreed with Barruel, right?
No, there were plenty of people who rejected his theory.
Like who?
Well, Jean-Joseph Mounier, for example, he had actually been involved in the revolution, and he argued that it was caused by the failures of the existing system, not by some grand conspiracy.
Okay, so he saw it as a more organic process.
Exactly. And even Joseph de Maistre, who was a conservative Catholic like Barruel, he dismissed the conspiracy theory as foolish.
So even within conservative circles, there was disagreement about the causes of the revolution.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a range of opinions, but Barruel's work really captured the imagination of a lot of people, and it had a lasting impact on the way that we think about conspiracies even today.
Interesting. So the master conspiracy idea has largely been rejected by mainstream historians, right?
Right. Most historians today don't believe that the French Revolution was the result of a single grand conspiracy.
But Barrel's work is still important, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Even though his central thesis isn't widely accepted, he was one of the first people to really try to analyze the role of conspiracy in history.
Okay, so he was kind of a pioneer in that sense.
You could say that, and his ideas about secret societies and hidden agendas have definitely influenced the way that we think about conspiracies today.
Right, because even if we don't believe in specific conspiracies, we still have this idea that there might be powerful groups working behind the scenes to manipulate events.
Exactly, and that idea has its roots in Barrel's work.
Wow, so his legacy is much bigger than just the French Revolution.
It is. He really helped to shape the way that we think about power and secrecy.
And the source also mentions his work as being valuable for understanding Freemasonry in Europe, despite his paranoia.
Right. Even though he was clearly biased against the Freemasons, he provides a lot of information about their beliefs and practices.
So his work can be useful, even if we take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the most biased sources can contain valuable information as long as we're critical readers.
So to sum up, Barruel argued that the French Revolution was not a spontaneous event, but the result of a long-term conspiracy involving the philosophies, Freemasons, and the Illuminati.
And that the Jacobins were the ones who ultimately carried out this conspiracy, overthrowing the church and the monarchy and plunging France into chaos.
Right, and while most historians reject this theory, Barruel's work is still significant because it was one of the first attempts to analyze the role of conspiracy in a historical event.
And his ideas about secret societies and hidden agendas have continued to resonate throughout history, shaping the way that we think about power, secrecy, and the forces that shape our world.
This all raises a pretty thought-provoking question, doesn't it? Like, why are we so drawn to conspiracy theories?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. Maybe it's because we want to believe that there's some order to the chaos, some hidden hand guiding events.
Right, because it's comforting to think that someone is in control, even if it's a shadowy group of conspirators.
Exactly. It gives us a sense of agency, even if it's a false one.
That's a good point. And it also makes you wonder about the dangers of conspiracy thinking.
Oh, yeah, because if you start believing that everything is a conspiracy, then you can lose trust in everything and everyone.
Right, it can lead to paranoia and division.
Exactly. So it's important to be critical of conspiracy theories and to remember that there's often a much more complex story behind the headlines.
Well said. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the fascinating and unsettling world of Abbé Barruel and his theories on the Illuminati conspiracy.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to talk about conspiracies.
Until next time, keep those tinfoil hats handy.
And keep questioning everything.
See you soon.